Hello there, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. It's easy for fans to dismiss the Confederacy of Independent Systems as a useless faction. Everything about the movement, from its legions of droids and cobbled-together separatist movement, could be described as artificial. The entire Clone Wars, in many ways, was a simulation, a controlled conflict in which both sides were actually being directed by the Sith. But the fighting itself, in space and on the ground, was quite real, especially if you ask the combatants who fought and died in the actual conflict. As much as Palpatine and Dooku tried to control the narrative, the only control they really had was over larger events, and all of their maneuvering had to be done with an invisible hand. The further we get away from the political and grand strategy levels of the war, the more natural and decentralized decision-making was. And so this was very much a real war. Now, we tend to focus quite a lot on the actions of the Jedi-led Grand Army of the Republic because they are the victors of this conflict and deployed what many Star Wars historians consider one of the finest infantry forces the galaxy had ever seen. But what we tend to forget is how much the Republic struggled against the Separatist droid army throughout most of the conflict. Characterized by cheaply built B-1 battle droids using parade formation-style battle tactics, it's easy to write off and dismiss the Confederacy's contribution to the art of warfare. But if we take a closer look at the Separatist Alliance and their military, this is probably one of the more innovative military forces in Star Wars history. Faced with extreme financial, industrial, and demographic constraints, the Confederacy of Independent Systems deployed many strategies that would actually be copied and mimicked by the Empire after the war ended. First, we have to remember that the Clone Wars broke out after a very unnatural 1,000 years of peace. This meant that during this period of time, there was very little military tradition in the galaxy, and as far as design philosophy for warships, for militaries, there is also a lack of existing, culture and ways of doing things, which opens the door to a lot of innovation and creativity from the military-industrial complex. At the beginning of the conflict, both the Republic and the Confederacy had to scramble to build a military from scratch, and both sides went into completely different directions. While the GAR is considered innovative because of its use of the clones, the actual military force they fielded is quite traditional. This is an infantry-heavy organization that relied on experienced leadership from the junior officers and non-coms, as the senior officer class were usually highly motivated Jedi or Judicial Department personnel who lacked real combat experience. The GAR puts a lot of investment in the individual warfighter, in the clones, who were well-schooled in combined arms and mechanized warfare, allowing a small group of individuals to be extremely effective by leveraging mobility and firepower. The GR depended on a carrier-heavy fleet that relies heavily on starfighters for screening, scouting, defensive, and offensive operations as well. It's all pretty straightforward, and from a doctrinal point of view, it kind of mimics what we see in a lot of real-life liberal democracies here in the world, where you put an emphasis on training the individual soldier and keeping them alive, because usually these societies are quite transparent and they cannot absorb high amounts of casualties during a conflict. Although ironically, the clones were not actually citizens of the Republic. They also didn't have the right to vote. They were very much slaves in this system. Palpatine was always very good at creating cynical policies like this that really decayed the moral and ethical high ground that made the Republic work in the first place. The Confederacy of Independent Systems, however, fielded a much more extreme and some might argue imbalanced military, mainly relying on automatons. They are the first military to do so in thousands of years, and this is what allows the relatively small Confederacy to challenge the much larger, richer Republic. Artificial intelligence is kind of a confusing subject matter for the Star Wars galaxy. It is treated in a lot more vague manner than other more hard science franchises, I guess. The droids and machine life we generally see are humanoid and imperfect. As a matter of fact, when a droid is not memory wiped for a long period of time, they begin to develop personalities and flaws that might hamper their overall performance, which really makes not a lot of sense for people to design machines to act like those. But that makes AI no less of a threat in the Star Wars galaxy. In Legends and in canon, we have multiple accounts of machine revolts that almost destroy all organic life in the galaxy. And according to the Yu Zhang saga, a war against AI actually destroyed a neighboring galaxy. Now, the one thing in the Republic that has always kept droids from taking over were kind of the way they dealt with droids. This includes those memory wipes I keep talking about, and also the use of restraining bolts. But the Confederacy of Independent Systems kind of threw out all of these safety measures out of sheer desperation, and they started relying heavily on AI technology to even the playing field. Now, the Separatist droid army can trace its roots all the way back to the Trade Defense Fleet, which was a security army developed by the Trade Federation to combat piracy. The prolific B-1 battle droid is actually just a modified version of the security droid used by the Trade Federation to blockade Naboo. Back then, computing power was centralized in a droid control ship. This was done for obvious cost-saving reasons, and also it fit the corporate security strategy that was being deployed at the time. Generally, corporations like the Techno Union, the IGBC, Trade Federation used their security assets to guard their ships and assets and trade routes, and in certain cases, their forces might be raised to launch an offensive in order to put pressure on entities or vendors that refuse to pay debts or something like that. We also see droids being used to suppress local labor uprisings and also to suppress local populations that they're trying to seize, resources from. There is very little Republic oversight in the Outer Rim, so they can basically do whatever they wanted. This very imbalanced security environment where the Trade Defense Fleet was, usually going up against either unarmed or lightly armed civilians, oftentimes with little to no military training, no organizational or logistic capabilities, is the kind of threat environment where you don't really need an elite fighting force, you just need mass. A lot of mass. The Trade Federation's main problem, one that the Galactic Empire would also have, was that there's just too much space, too much real estate for it to defend. Therefore, by centralizing the most expensive part of any droid army, the compute, in one location, they can significantly decrease the cost per unit by having a lot less hardware going into the individual droids. And again, since the battlefields were so imbalanced, all the Trade Defense Fleet had to do was to protect its central droid command ship and fortify that area. That was the only thing that they couldn't lose. Of course, during the Battle of Naboo, Anakin Skywalker does manage to destroy that crucial command center, severing connection to all of the individual battle droids in the theater, which basically halts the entire invasion. Now, the modern B-1 battle droid is designed for the battlefield, and, it rectifies a lot of the problems with those older OM security droids with the centralized command. What they essentially do here is go from centralized computing to edge computing by putting the hardware necessary for each one of these B-1 battle droids to operate independently. Now, in itself, this is not necessarily a huge leap in technology. It is very difficult to network a large military force together and have them, act together and work in tandem. But these advances show us that the Separatist droid army has been continuously refining and upgrading their droid models and their brains and their programming. If we take a look at the latter BX Commando droids and the more specialized Magna Guard droids, they show a high deal of sophistication and tactical abilities that match even the clones. Interestingly enough, by the last year of the conflict, the Separatists managed to kidnap several clone combatants, including the ARC Trooper Echo, and they basically attach his brain to a computer interface while keeping him in stasis. The computer then basically tests Echo's brain and ran countless battlefield scenarios with the clones' memories and tactical and strategic inclinations. Remember, clones might be individualistic, but they all have the same DNA, they all have the same training, and what was in Echo's mind was pretty valuable. They basically could figure out how the average clone trooper thinks from a tactical point of view, and they started adapting those all that data into their own combat algorithms. This kind of reminds me of the storyline of the XCOM game. Was it the second XCOM game? But anyway, this is essentially machine learning applied by the Separatist Alliance in order to improve their own droid army. The idea here is brute force data being placed into a central computer, which then begins to learn and eventually even is able to predict the movement of clone forces. And we actually see in the late stages of the Outer Rim Siege during the Battle of Atollon, Commander Cody and the rest of the Clone Command are very worried about the effectiveness of this program, and it's threatening to really turn the tide against the GAR. This was a remarkable technological breakthrough, and it shows us that the Separatists were capable of innovation that could completely change how the battle is being fought. Unfortunately, these kind of programs came way too late in the conflict to really be meaningful. Most military forces are funded by taxpayer money, and that means the whole process of procuring and designing weapons is very complicated. It's not that there's a lot of care placed into it, one could argue. There's a lot of cost overruns, but yeah, there's a lot of bureaucracy, rules, oversight, There's a lot of political stuff going on as well. The Separatist Alliance is basically on the opposite end of the spectrum. This is the private sector, and as mentioned before, this is a group that is mainly backed by a group of corporate and industrial entities based in the Outer Rim. These individuals have long been exploiting local labor and environmental standards to meet extremely high standards for efficiency and margins growth that you would expect from a galactic mega conglomerate. The Trade Federation and Techno Unions specifically have perfected the art of manufacturing and resource extraction, and they actually have fought against other large core world corporations and won in a very vicious free market environment. So these are very well-tested companies as far as their commercial models go. When you apply that commercial model to warfare, it can lead to some pretty interesting things. For instance, the Separatist droid army is far more cost-efficient than your usual military force. And since all these corporations are in an alliance together, they can further pool their resources and get rid of potential redundancies. This is really just a large oligopoly. This leads to one of the cheapest and largest military forces ever produced. From a cost perspective, a clone would need to kill hundreds of B-1 battle droids to even justify the overall training and equipping cost of one clone. Actually, many early Republic intelligence reports during the Clone Wars indicated that the Separatist droid army had millions and millions of units ready to march on Coruscant, and a lot of these analysts were confused why they didn't just end the war within the first month. Main reason is because, Palpatine didn't want that to happen. What also was very ingenious and allowed the Separatist Navy to appear out of thin air was the use of dual-purpose hulls, like the Munificent-class Star Frigate or the Lucrehulk battleship. These were essentially large freighters that could be up-armored, shielded, and up-armed, and used in a variety of different fleet roles, from a carrier to a battleship to a transport. This is how the Separatist Navy was able to hold its own against the major shipyards controlled by the Republic, like Corellia, Quat, and Fondor. The Republic fielded far more specialized warships, like the Venator-class Star Destroyer, and while they were excellent ships in their own right, they were also outnumbered heavily, especially in the first few years of the war, by the Trade Federation's more hybrid fleet. This is actually not without precedent. If you take a look at China, there are currently laws and regulations that first force all commercial shipwrights to essentially build their large commercial vessels to military standards, as in the hulls have to be reinforced, the deck plating also has to be reinforced so that they can accommodate larger heavy vehicles like tanks, armored personnel carriers probably. As we all know, China has plans to invade Taiwan across the strait, and I think a part of that process includes converting a huge portion of their commercial and civilian fleets into military transports. Another very interesting thing the Separatist droid army designers did was create several product lines that were very specialized in their capabilities. While the B-1 battle droid was a general-purpose droid that could fill in a wide variety of roles, just like the average clone, you also had specialized units like the B-2 super battle droid, which was a heavy assault unit with a lot more armor and firepower. You also had droidicas, which specialized in an anti-personnel role and did very well at it. We talked about the BX Commando droid. It is capable of special operations, infiltration, and commando raids. You even had tactical droids that specialized in command. This creates a very layered and role-based military force, which is far more complex than you would expect from, an army that mass produces cheap droids. Again, the Separatists are able to leverage their design and industrial expertise to roll out multiple specialized units without really increasing their overall cost that much. And while the individual droids were known for the lack of flexibility, because all of these droids were built for a special purpose, that made them extremely efficient at the roles they were supposed to actually play. And so if they were deployed properly, it was extremely hard to defeat these type of units. We typically think the Separatist droid army is a joke because of the more laughable behavior of the B-1 battle droids, especially those who have not been properly memory wiped. But being caught in a hallway with a droidica is absolutely terrifying and deadly. Being assaulted by a legion of B-2 battle droids can shake even the most hardened units, even those behind fortification. It's actually a testament to the clones' training that they're able to adapt to these various threats so quickly. I think had the Republic used civilian volunteers and conscripts, they probably would have been completely wiped out by the droid army pretty quickly. I mean, this is a very terrifying force to face. Both the Republic and the Separatist Alliance had their own research weapons programs, but I think the Separatist Alliance really pushed the envelope in what they were able to do. First, the prototype Death Star was actually created by the Geonosian Hive and would one day become the most powerful space station in the galaxy. We also have ingeniously evil weapons programs like the defoliator round, which is fired out of a tank or artillery-style unit. The round essentially vaporizes any organic material that it hits while keeping droids and mechanical beings intact. It's kind of like a reverse electroproton bomb that the Republic developed and used during the Battle of Malastare. We also have some pretty, evil Separatist bio-weapons programs like the FG-36 virus, which specifically targeted the FET DNA and genome and essentially left other humanoids healthy. The Republic obviously had to send a task force especially to deal with that situation. We also have the Separatist attempt to turn the extremely deadly Blue Shadow virus into an airborne variant that is far more contagious than in its original form. There generally is a lot less oversight in the private sector, and there's even less oversight in the Outer Rim. And how the Separatist military built their army is very similar to a startup. Basically, they just start throwing things at the wall, smashing and breaking norms and conventions until they found things that worked. And they don't really seem to care about the consequences of the weapons that they are creating. This is what leads to massive super weapons like the Malevolence, which featured an ion cannon so large that it could take out entire fleets, at which point its massive amount of turbolasers can turn what remains into molten slag. And then we have much smaller and much cheaper, but nonetheless extremely efficient passive weapons like the Buzz Droid. Part mine, part droid, part nightmare, these tiny little guys are seated in likely approach vectors for enemy fleets or shot out of missiles. They basically wait until a ship gets near them and they cling onto those ships and begin to dismantle them with a variety of different tools, ranging from saws to plasma cutters to drill bits. While individually they are very easy to destroy, if you get more than a few of them on your ship, your electrical systems will get destroyed very quickly, and eventually they will breach the hull of your vessel. Basically, when these things latch onto your ship, you have only a few minutes to figure out how to get rid of them or just bail out. A very good tactical tool, but also a very effective psychological weapon that slows down navigation and strikes fear into the hearts of your enemies. And also because the Separatist Navy was mostly crewed by droids, you didn't have a lot of pressurized compartments, so Buzz droids were far less effective against the Separatist Navy. And yes, the Separatists left these droids just everywhere. They were just discarded munitions, kind of like how landmines are a problem here on Earth. Well, in Star Wars, in the decades following the Clone Wars, you just had a hyperspace lane seeded with these things, and of course, the average spacer was absolutely terrified by these Buzz droids. Ultimately, the Clone Wars served as a gigantic playground and testbed for a wide range of military technology and doctrine. The Clone Army and Droid Army by design are different because they present Palpatine with the maximum amount of choice when it comes to building his future Imperial military. Although the Stormtrooper and the Imperial-class Star Destroyer seem reminiscent, at least aesthetically, to the Clone Trooper and Venator, beneath the hood, these things were all designed with Separatist quantity over quality mentality and the battleship versus carrier mentality. The only problem with adopting the Separatist Alliance corporate mentality is that you get all of the weaknesses of this mentality as well. Separatist corporations sought to destroy individuality, and they try to build machines that they were not accountable to. But the problem is the Empire used humans instead of machines, and no matter how hard they try to turn these humans into droids, it ultimately backfired on them. The corporate leadership of the Separatist Alliance also cared very little about the morals and ethics of their decisions, even if they caused long-term problems. And this too would also backfire for the Empire. Many actions like the destruction of Alderaan with the Death Star galvanized the opposition and even led to mass defection amongst Imperial ranks. The corporations of the Outer Rim in the late Republic period were able to operate without impunity, and Emperor Palpatine also tried to operate in this way, but unfortunately, even when you are in charge of a totalitarian dictatorship, you are still beholden to the will of the people somewhat. But anyway, guys, those are the major innovations that the Separatist Alliance brought to the art of warfare, I guess. And I think it's actually an overlooked part of this military faction. They are very interesting, very unique in the larger scope of Star Wars kind of lore. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. I'll see you next time.